everyone, and welcome to the .NET Core Podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, SignalR, and not forgetting the .NET community itself. I am your host, Jamie Gaprogman-Taylor. In this episode, I talked with Vijesh about some of our advice for beginner programmers and whether C# and .NET are the right choice for those who are just starting out on their journey in development. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let the show begin. So first thing I'd like to say, Vijesh, is thank you ever so much for spending your afternoon with me talking about what we're about to talk about. Usually, so a little bit of insider baseball. Usually we have a topic and a bunch of ideas we want to talk about, but you know, it's an easygoing show. We can go off in a different direction. So at the moment, I've got an idea of what we're going to talk about, but we may end up talking about something else. I don't know. It's a Saturday afternoon. We're having some chill out time. We're both sans children. It's brilliant. We're having just some time to chill. So thank you for spending that time with me.
Cool. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
You're very, very welcome. Very welcome. So I was wondering, before we get into sort of the topic that we're going to tackle today, I was wondering, could you let the listeners know a little bit about yourself? Give us a little brief introduction, your sort of technical background, the places you've worked, the projects that you're working on, if you can talk about them, that kind of thing.
Cool. My name is Vijesh Salian, and I'm a software engineer, primarily in the .NET ecosystem. And I started my career coding in Delphi and then moved on to C#. And I like to mentor beginners and upcoming developers as well. So that's like, I've learned a lot from my peers, and it feels like giving back to people who want to learn more as well. And I worked in Bangalore in India, and currently I'm working in Netherlands, and I've been here for about 3 years now. And I'm working for a healthcare company, which is called Vital Images. It's part of Canon Group. And and I've been part of healthcare companies before as well. So I like the domain, and it gives a sense of purpose to what I'm doing.
Sure, there's a whole bunch of things you mentioned there that I can totally get behind. I really like the idea of giving back to the community. That's wonderful to me. Like you said, we're always learning from our peers. If it's reading a blog post, if it's listening to a podcast, if it's just interacting with people and talking over the water cooler or whatever. Hey, I'm having a problem with this. Hey, have you tried this? Or, oh, I really can't figure this out. Hey, well, why don't we talk about this? Or just going to a meetup and listening to someone give a talk. I absolutely love that idea of giving back. And I try to do that whenever I can, but I'm not much of a mentor. I don't think I'm that good at teaching people, but that remains to be seen, I suppose. And then, the talk about, you said there about giving the work that you do a sort of sense of meaning, which I think gets lost on a lot of us developers, especially if, a project I've just worked on was essentially a CRUD app, create, reuse, create, replace, update, delete, stuff like that. It's like, create, read, update, delete. It's just an interface to a database, right? There's no context there. It's just this company wants to store this data from a form into the database and pull that data out. There's no real meaning to it. It's meaningful to the client, but not to me. But I totally get the idea of searching for that meaning. Let's do something that helps people, that helps society.
Yeah. That's also very important to have that a sense of importance of what are you going to do, and C# has provided me that. Like I said, I began coding in Delphi, and it is also a wonderful language to be in. But at that point in time, everybody was getting into C# .NET in Bangalore, and I started learning C#. And I remember picking up headfirst C# at that point in time, and it was a good book to start, and I'm glad I did.
Excellent. I have to admit, I've never touched Delphi. I've never worked with it. I have worked with C, and some friends of mine tell me it's quite similar. It's in that same language family, the C, C++, C#, Java. It has a similar syntax and things like that, but I've never touched it before, so I can't comment on Delphi, unfortunately.
All right. Well, yeah, but it's I think C Sharp and Delphi might have the same ancestry or from the same origins, if I'm not wrong. But it's also a cool language, yeah.
Cool. Maybe this winter I'll pick up. So for just before I say that, because of what I call the Timecast pod machine wibbly wobbliness, we're recording this ahead of time. So I'm about to mention winter, and this is coming out in hopefully April if everything works out well. So maybe this coming winter, or for the listener, this past winter, I picked up Delphi and made something with it. I don't know. I'm always looking for new projects to do in other languages, right? I recently started. Well, this was ages ago, actually. I started making a game for the Sega Mega Drive, the Sega Genesis, in low-level C, because I was like, it's been years since I've touched C. Let's see what I can do, right? I don't want to just make a command line application. Let's make something fun. Little did I know that making games isn't that fun.
Yeah. The other side of games, like playing, is much more than making games. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would much rather. No, well, no, that's not fair. I think using the slightly older technology, because it's so constrained, if you don't know about those constraints and you're used to using, say, C# and .NET, where it's like, I don't need to worry about memory management. I don't need to worry about sockets. Although you wouldn't really use a socket in a Mega Drive game, but you know what I mean? I don't need to worry about buffers and memory access and pointers and things like that. It's all just taken care of for me. Going from that to, oh wow, I've got a buffer overload because I kept writing to this same pointer and I've wiped out my memory, or I've got some kind of stack allocation error and I don't know what it means because the compiler is really bad.
Yeah. Game development is surely fascinating, and I've been meaning to give it a shot with C# and Unity, but it seems like the time for it has not come yet. But it's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally understand that. I've wanted to get into Unity, but I'm not a very artistic person, so it's like, where do I get the 3D models from? Where do I get the textures from, the sound effects, all that kind of stuff? And then I end up spending hours looking around on Google for free textures or license free textures that I can use. And I do that for 3 or 4 days rather than actually building something.
Yeah, that's major part of it as well. Like I think I'll mention this. First, when I started my career with the Delphi coding, I had a senior developer in the company who helped me, begin my professional coding career. One of the first thing he taught me is how to Google. So, looking for resources on the internet is one of the skills that is very important. And I think most developers at this age, in 2020, are pretty good at Googling stuff. But in 2008, it was not that, it was popular, yes, but it was not the go-to thing right away. And he taught me a few operators in Google, like this plus this, or put this search term in quotes, and then you get a better search results. Especially when I had to do something in C#, I had to put it in quotes because it was the Google wasn't smart enough to recognize the pound symbol there, and it is the results for C. So I think that's a very, very important skill for any developer to start searching on the internet. That's a very important skill to mention there.
Sure. I think it's an important skill for anyone to learn how to use a search engine, not just Google, but let's use, because you used it. Let's use Google as the example. Everyone should know how to use a search engine, to utilize it. A friend of mine puts full, grammatically correct English sentences into Google, and I'm like, that's not how it works. You can do it like that, but that's not how it works. You'll get the best results if you rearrange the words into the most important words in your sentence, because obviously English is very the important chunk of the sentence is at the end, and so Google has to work its way through everything to get to the important bit. But yeah, I do think that if folks spend a little time learning the search engine that they're using, they will make their lives much better. And I think you're absolutely right. Back in 2008, I think I think Stack Overflow had started, but it was very quiet. And so you're looking at forums, you're looking at official documentation, and the Microsoft official documentation back then wasn't the state that it's in now. It wasn't the best, but it was getting there. Whereas now it's completely open source, and you see something that's wrong, you can go in and put in a pull request, and hey, you've contributed towards a Microsoft product. And if it's during October and you want a free t-shirt, do that 4 times. You've got your Hacktoberfest t-shirt, but make sure it's good quality. It's not just like, oh, I've put a period in here, or I've changed the spacing here. It's got to be a good quality commit.
Yeah, Microsoft Docs is definitely a good starting point for anyone starting in .NET. And I've been 12 years doing C#, but I constantly go see docs.microsoft.com for any syntax or any new information that's available. And I remember at 2008, you're right saying that Stack Overflow was not that popular as it is now. But there used to be Expert Exchange, which for C# and Delphi also there were some question and answers, but it was a paid one, so you get only limited views. That was a bit of a challenge. And Microsoft Docs, there were classes and methods and metadata information about that assembly, but now it's so much better. It's much more than a book, also perhaps in some cases.
Maybe so. Maybe Microsoft should release the Microsoft Press C# Docs edition. I think maybe not.
It'll be a large one and might not be able to accept PRs there.
Absolutely. Well, this is it, right? I started working in C# and .NET back in 2004, I think. So we're talking the .NET 2 timeline, I think. And at that time, you got I received an official ISO download for Visual Studio. It came across 2 CDs, I think. And you could actually download the entirety of the MSDN, the documentation, across, I think it was 2 or 3 DVDs. And you would download that, burn it to disk, and then install it onto your computer. And that way, obviously, you had the offline documentation, right? But that was, at that time, I was like, oh my goodness, what am I getting into? There's 4 DVDs of information. This is a huge amount of information.
Absolutely.
But I guess the key point, and we'll come on to it in a minute, I suppose we're already there now, is don't try and learn it all at once, I guess. Learn just about enough to get you past the next step. But that's my advice. But there you go.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. And I've fallen into that trap many times. Like, if I'm learning something, I would just want to learn everything that involves that matter, and that is perhaps not a good idea. And also lately in the software industry, we do a lot of agile work, Scrum and Agile, and it has got many principles that I can apply to not just software development, but also learning and other stuff as well. And learn a bit of what you can, and then improve on it. And I think that's a very nice way to go, so that it keeps you motivated, and you just don't burn out in one day. Look, you learn everything, and then next day you don't have enough energy to continue learning this stuff. So you're absolutely right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the idea of continual feedback. If you are let's just talk about learning for a moment, right? Because I did actually used to be a teacher. I graduated from uni with a computer science degree, and then decided I wanted to become a teacher, so trained to be a teacher. Then left that because of the politics involved with the particular school that I was working at, and went back to computer science, right? But if you see yourself as the client, and you're wanting to expand your knowledge, and you have a short turnaround time, maybe not 2 weeks, maybe that's a little too much, maybe every few hours, right? If you're trying to study something, you start learning it, you make notes on the important bits, like you say, just learn the important bits. At the end of that hour, have a retrospective and look at what worked, what didn't work, which bits do I remember, which bits do I need to cover again, and go back and cover those bits again, right? It like you said, it makes perfect sense.
Absolutely, yeah. And doing makes much more help to you than just reading. And and that's what I like about developers now. And I also came from a background of computer science, and there was a lot of reading of books and stuff, but actually doing stuff, and it makes more sense now than ever that you don't need a degree to learn coding. You just have to open up your editor, start typing, find errors, search, fix it, and that's how you learn. And that's absolutely a very nice way to learn, I think.
Absolutely. The majority of the tools that you need to start doing any kind of coding they are built into your computer, right? I'd be very hard pressed to find someone who has just bought a laptop or just bought a computer and it doesn't have a web browser. If it's got a web browser, you've got a JavaScript execution engine right there. It may not be the best. It may be the best. I don't know. But you've got the tools right there. And all operating systems have text editors. Like you said, you open the text editor, you start typing, and if it goes wrong, you start searching around for the answer. Sometimes there are licenses for tools, but the majority of the compilers and the editors are free. So, and the knowledge is free. You just have to look for it. And if someone is one of the things I always say to people, you want to learn computer programming, find someone to teach you. You can go to university and get a computer science degree, but that's going to be, like you said, mostly theoretical, right? You're learning why does binary search work that way? Why do computers work the way that they do? How do we go from code which is written in a text file to an executable? And none of that will help solve the problem of the customer wants it to look like this,
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of computer science stuff is only in niche companies, I would say. And I'm doing more of programming and coding and not actually computer science. So to make a career in, as a programmer, it's more and more the reason that computer science degree is not a mandatory thing. And I remember this being one of the requirements for some of the jobs. And I think now companies are becoming more and more relaxed in that way, saying that if you know this language and you can work with it, that's fine enough.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hate to pick on JavaScript. I'm not necessarily picking on it, but I feel like we'll talk about C# and .NET in a moment, I guess. But I feel like JavaScript, because of that incredibly low barrier to entry of the tools are already on your computer, you just need to figure out where they are and how to access them. Yes. That makes it one of these languages that's very trivial to get started in. Not easy to get started in, but very trivial. You're falling over yourself not to get started. And so there's almost no excuse not to, and I know a whole bunch of people who either never went to university or went to university for some other field of study. And then they've come out the other end, worked in an industry for 5, 10, 15 years, and then gone, you know what, I want to learn to do programming. I know one person who is a retired doctor, like a GP, right? And he used to teach medicine as well. And he's completely retired from all of that. And he's gone, you know what, I want to learn .NET. And so we're working together to help him learn a little bit more about .NET and C# and F# and what's the difference and why would you use one rather than the other, or should you use one over the other, all that kind of stuff. And it's a brilliant journey to go on because he doesn't have to go to university. Why would you need to go to university to learn about C#, right? It's the documentation, there's things like this show, there's people on Twitch all the time. You don't have to.
Absolutely. It's like, if you can count and do simple arithmetic, you can code. And you don't have to need an official certificate to say that you can do this or not. That's absolutely right.
Absolutely. So I guess that brings us on to, so we've been talking a lot so far about we've said that you don't need a computer science degree to get started in the field that we work in. And I think that is, by and large, absolutely correct. If all you're doing is, and I don't want to don't want to reduce what anyone does as a job. Like, okay, let's say you go to university for 3 years, do computer science, right? You go through there's this meme, right? This joke of you go through the interviewing process, really grueling, and there's a whiteboard and some markers, and it's like implement bubble sort, implement this sorting algorithm. You have these constraints. Now figure out how to reverse this string without using any library components. And then, so first thing I say to them is, why am I not allowed to use string.reverse? That gets the job done in like 4 keystrokes, right? And then they say, oh, well, we're using .NET, but you're not allowed to use .NET. And then I say, well, why are we using .NET then, right? So we put that to one side, right? So you go through this grueling interview process. There's multiple stages to the interview process. You've got to talk about memory usage. You've got to talk about, data usage, all the hundreds of different things to talk about. And you're talking about low-level SQL and all sorts of stuff. And then you get to the job. First task is, this button is blue, it needs to be red, and it needs to be 4 pixels to the left. You don't need a computer science degree to do that, you know?
Yeah. And even if you had it, it would be still difficult because of CSS, and there's a lot more things to it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It would be just as difficult for someone without a computer science degree to make the button blue and shift it 4 pixels to the left than it would someone with a degree.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
If like in computer science, we might have read about trees or red black trees and everything. And if I have to do something very similar, I still have to go look it up because I've forgotten all that stuff. And anybody without a degree can also look it up and acquire that knowledge straight away.
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess the immediate difference would be that you or I would know what to search for, like the actual terms, whereas perhaps someone who hasn't had that experience of talking about binary trees or different types of search algorithms, they may not know the exact words to search, but then you could ask someone and they go, oh yeah, what you want is a binary tree, or you want to search for the A-star algorithm, just search for that, find a version of it in C#, read through it, get your head around it, and then implement it. And that would normally, with certain juniors I've worked with, turns into find it, copy, paste, done.
Yeah. As long as you have a pretty solid test suite, I think it still works fine. Although I would recommend to, just understand a bit of code what you copy. That's absolutely the best way to go.
That's it. That's what I always tell juniors. I'm like, okay, you just copy pasted it, close the browser, now tell me what it's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done it loads of times when I was a beginner, and I got told the same things by my senior peer who said, okay, what does it do? I said, I don't know. We'll test it out and see. Yeah, but that's not always the best strategy.
No, that's true. But I guess being able to read some code that already exists and understanding what it's doing, that's 90% of the job that we do, right? Because the code that we are working with, or the majority of the code that we're working with, already exists. And it's either fix this thing or add this thing to it or make this thing better. And so obviously being able to understand the code is maybe the most important step. I tell people all the time, yes, I'm a developer, but I spend about 70% of my time debugging. I very rarely write new code. Once you've gotten past the first maybe 3 or 4 iterations of a project, you're not writing new code anymore. You're debugging, or at least that's my experience. Maybe I'm a terrible developer. I don't know.
But that's very, very good point that you bring up, and I absolutely agree with you. And me being a C# developer, I've done more code reading than code writing, and more of debugging others' code, and that's also very important. And also along the years, developed empathy. And there was a time where I used to call, "Hey, who did this? This is really bad code." And now I don't feel the need to say that, and because whoever has written that at that point in time, he felt that was the best code. And if not, he might have added a comment a bit, hey, this might not be the best part of the code. And after these many years, I think I developed some empathy towards developers who have written that. And And that's also very important during code reviews and everything. You're seeing so much of others' code than your code, and reading of the code is definitely a very important skill, which I think every beginner should start at it.
Sure. I think you've hit on a really important point there about having empathy for other developers, because I think you almost exactly said what I'm about to say, which is you don't know the pressure that developer was under in order to get this code checked in, right? It could be that they've chosen a substandard algorithm or had to implement their own version of, say, a for each or an iterator or something, right? They've had to iterate it, they'd had to create their own because the version that they were using works for 99% of the cases, but then in this 1%, which might be quite often, it breaks. And so they've had to work around that. And yeah, I totally agree that empathy for your fellow developers is something that we should all have. I don't know about you, but I definitely have a case where I'd gone, who wrote this? This is dreadful. And I've done a Git blame, and it's either been me or the person I've sat with. And I've gone, oh no, I don't care if it's me, but I've just said that your code is dreadful. That's no good.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all go through that. And one of the, paths that you become a good developer is you start from being a bad developer. It's not a good term to say for a beginner, but that's what happens. You don't write perfect code when you start, and that's fine, and that's absolutely fine.
Yep. There's this what is it? There's this idea of a thing called ontological humility, and that is the ability to take a step back from a situation and say, the way that I'm observing it is limited. I'm looking at it through, say, like a cone, and I'm not seeing the whole world. So what I'm seeing doesn't necessarily reflect the actual situation. I may be looking at this 4-line block of code, right? And I might be thinking, well, that's dreadful for a whole bunch of reasons. But looking at that 4-line block of code, I can't see what's coming in or what's going out of it. I can just see the 4-line block of code, and being able to sort of look at that and go, okay, I'll take it for what it is, but maybe I should investigate a little bit more around it and ask the questions less of an accusatory question and just a, hey, just explain this to me, because I don't know what else is going on, but just explain what's going on. Asking that, why is it done this way, but not in a accusatory way, is really difficult to do, I think.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think in code reviews, I've found in my experience that what questions work much better than why questions. If I ask, oh, why did you do this? It seems a little bit accusatory. It depends on who takes the question as well. But if I say, oh, what does this code accomplish? It's already a bit softer there. And I try to come up with what and how questions during code reviews, and rather than why questions. And that has been a bit of learning for me. And I think
sure.
Everybody should do code reviews, and it's definitely helps for pair programming and building up the team. That's very important.
Absolutely. I tend to think of what were the constraints while you were building this, or how have you worked around the constraints. Then it's less a case of what are you doing, more what is this thing that you're working with. But I like I say, I don't know. I may be a terrible developer. You never know, right?
Yeah, we are made of both things. It depends on the time, and at some point in time, we could be okay. Today is not the best day. The code's gone out, and there was a time pressure. But some other days, we are very good at it. It feels good. So there's a bit of that too.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of advice for beginners and how we can get to a point where, how do we go from where we are to where we want to be, right? The advice that we would give to junior developers without really actually saying what is our advice to junior developers. But when we were first talking about this, recording this episode, we were talking about how C# and .NET are actually quite good for beginners. And, as someone who I actually started The first code that I ever wrote was in BASIC, but the old school BASIC, not Visual BASIC. And then after that, I started writing in assembler. So maybe I'm not the best person to talk about where should a beginner start, because I went in hard. But I mean, how do you feel about that? About C# and .NET being good for sort of beginner developers?
I think C# is very good language for beginners, especially now that if you don't want to spend any money and you still want to learn programming language, C# is definitely one of the top languages out there. And there's so much documentation happening. There's so much content on blogs. There's so much content on video. No matter what your learning techniques are, learning favorite learning technique, it's there. The content is out there. And I really like not the experts doing the trainings, but also people who are not the experts, not from Microsoft or not from any big companies. When they write blogs and when they create videos, they're touching upon certain aspects of the languages that the experts might have not even thought about it, and that will definitely help few other people who think in that way. And as a community, I think we should let beginners also share their learning experiences. And there's so much content out there for C#. I think any beginner would be definitely happy to do it. And also on the other side of the things is what you get out of C# and .NET is the platform and the ecosystem is so huge. You think about platform, web, mobile, IoT. With one language and one platform, you can do multiple things. And if I was picking up a language, and I would be biased towards .NET, of course, because I'm there now, but it would be definitely one of the things I would consider.
Sure, yeah. You talked, there's a couple of things I want to pick up on there because there's some really good points there. I know from my own experience, so I don't know about what other people have experienced, but I feel like the .NET community is quite open to beginners. Every community has its bad apples. It's people who are like, oh well, you shouldn't be doing it this way. Don't do it that way because you're being silly, because you're a noob. If you can avoid those people, and they happen in every community, not just programming. They happen in health and fitness. They happen in science. They happen everywhere. If you can find a group of people to work with who maybe they are Twitch streamers, maybe they are bloggers, maybe they do a podcast. I don't know. If you can find these content creators and these mentors who don't have that attitude, then I feel like the .NET community is really open to beginners. I do know that there was someone who was on the show very early on, Jeff Fritz, and he does C#. I think it used to be, what was it called? C# and Friends is what it used to be called.
Yeah.
But he does like a almost daily Twitch stream where he's always building something. Right.
Yeah.
And if you ask a question, it doesn't matter if it's super high, like let's talk about IA sync enumerable, or if it's, hey, I've literally just started. Where should I go? He goes on a journey with you straight away. And that I absolutely love. But then again, he's a Microsoft employee, so he's taking the happy path, right? He says, go download this, go download that, I do this. And you hinted at the beginners producing all of this content. And it's wonderful to see that, because even like if you get stuck, it's live coding streaming is not for everyone. But if you're doing it and you get stuck, you can ask the people who are in the chat window, you can ask the viewers, hey, I'm kind of stuck. Has anyone ever seen this before? They can then tell you what to look for, or they can give you the answer and then talk through it. And you're like, oh, wow, we've just been on this journey. Excuse me, we're literally pair programming and we've just learned this thing. And I absolutely love to see that. I don't get to use Twitch that often these days, but when I do, I'm always looking for the beginners. And it could be great for if you want to learn a new language too. Because like I'm a C# guy, right? If I want to learn Python, I'll go, right, find a beginner's Python, because I'm at the more or less the same level as them. And even if they get stuck, if I don't know the answer, I can ask a relatively similar question. Like, oh, okay, so in C# we would do it this way. Have you tried looking for, like, there was someone who was saying, how do I iterate over a collection in Python? And I said, well, in C# we have a thing called link. Is there something similar to link in Python? Let me have a Google for you whilst we're here. And I switched over to a new tab and started Googling around. Oh yeah, I found this resource. Try and check this out. And the pair of us went on this journey of what is the Python equivalent of link, right? And so it can totally be helpful.
That's absolutely great. Yeah.
Rolling. Action in 3, 2, 1.
No one calls me these days. Oh, hey, what host, Squitch?
Have you finished that big new feature for the website yet?
Absolutely.
Hang on. Oh, that's not bad. It loads pretty quickly. There's every episode on it as well.
X.
What's this button all about?
Don't push that button.
That ain't gonna happen.
No!
Nothing happened.
That's what you think. Waffling Tailors is a podcast all about video games and nonsense. Check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts, or head over to wafflingtailors.rocks. So if you want to hear more from my brother, who may or may not be a cartoon wolf, and myself about video games and silliness, head over to wafflingtailors.rocks, or look for us wherever you listen to audio.
And don't forget that we have tons of guests and that we've covered over 1,300 games on our show so far.
And that we have over 110 episodes to choose from, too.
Wafflingtailors.rocks.
Cut. Print.
Was that okay, Russell?
It was sufficient. Editing now.
Yeah, I agree with you that the beginners and the non-experts can hit on these issues whilst they're building up their knowledge. And the most important tip that I give to a beginner developer is you're going to get them anyway, so get used to reading the error message. Read don't just skip past, oh, something broke, I'll just carry on. No, the error message, at least in C# and .NET, will literally tell you what was wrong. You know, they're one step away from saying, change this variable and you're done. You know, they're one step away from actually fixing it for you.
Yeah.
And that can really be a game changer, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And I was once mentoring a developer who started coding almost at the end, almost half of his career later. So he was into management, and then he picked up coding, and then he started C#, and then he started hitting these issues, you know, errors and stuff, which can be, because errors look like failures to write correct code, but it's in a different direction. And I think you were right on point saying that, you know, just reading the error message solves it puts you on the right path there to fix the problem. And it also develops, you know, what a mechanical sympathy to what you're working with, and that is very crucial to develop. And in the Rust ecosystem, I tried a bit of Rust programming language, and the compiler can be, you know, how do you say? It complains a lot, especially as a C# programmer when I first try. But the community is kind of say that compiler is your friend, and it does a lot of work for you. I think that applies to most languages, and we need to get used to that. It's not something that we should be disappointed when there's an error, but that is a point where we can pivot and learn, okay, what needs to be changed, and it can be very satisfying to fix that once you do it.
Absolutely. I chased down a bug recently that took almost 2 days of constant work inside it. You know, I use Rider from JetBrains a lot. This isn't an endorsement, I just really like it. And I was for several hours each day across 2 days going, why is this not, I don't understand why this isn't working. It should be working. And putting more breakpoints in, putting debug statements in, writing out to the console, writing to the logs, increasing everything, you know, to the point where just running it was bringing the performance of my laptop down to the floor. It was like the laptop was going, stop, it's too much, too many things to do. But then I eventually got to the end, and it turns out that I had some ID column in the database the wrong way around. Like I was using a foreign key as a primary key, and just that moment of elation, like that is not a standard experience for a junior developer, I have to say. If you found yourself in that situation and you're a junior developer, go get help. Don't sit there and stress over it. And I use the phrase bash your head against the keyboard. Don't keep doing that. Go get help. But because I was the only .NET dev on the project, I had no one to turn to, right? So I was like, I have to figure this out. But yeah, that moment where you go from this is erroring, this should be working, why is it not working, to, oh my great goodness, it's working. You feel invincible, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point. Like, go get help. And it's, how to say, I wish I had done that more when I was a junior developer. And at that point in time, there was kind of a, if you had to do an internet search for some C# syntax, I had to be sure there's no one around.
Mm-hmm.
But now I think it's not associated with that, shame, if I use that word. But now it's more common for people to do an internet search, and that is absolutely fine. But I still see some group of people that, searching on the internet. Okay, he doesn't know some things, but the fact in the software industries, it's not possible to know everything. It's just not possible, and it's okay to do a search on the internet. It's okay to ask your peer. And sometimes if I'm stuck with a problem, and if I'm the senior developer in the team, I just need an extra pair of eyes. So it could be a 1 year junior developer. I just ask him to join me and just work through the problem with me. That also helps.
Oh, absolutely. Oh dear, I always get it the wrong way around. I think it's the pragmatic programmer, but it may be the mythical mammoth. One of these two books, I always confuse them. I sort of fuse them together because I read them back to back and just like in a fever dream of I want to be a better developer. And there's a story in one of those, I feel like it's the pragmatic programmer, about a developer who carried a rubber duck around with him. And this engineer, and he was just like, he had this rubber duck everywhere he went. You know, the kind of duck you would put in a bathtub, right, that floats on the water?
Yeah.
And he would just have that with him, and it was on his desk. And if he went up to get him a cup of coffee, he'd take it with him, and then he'd sit back down. And the idea was, it's where we get the term rubber duck debugging from, and that is literally talking about the problem will activate the parts of your brain that are not activated when you are thinking. And so if I'm talking to you and I say, Vijesh, I have this really tough problem with the database, right? And I start talking to you about the problem I had a few days ago. And I'm like, it says that it's a foreign key constraint issue, but there's no foreign key in use. The part of my brain will go, hey, go check the foreign keys then. But I'm not checking that. I'm checking everything else, right? And it's proved science. It's a bit silly, and I don't always recommend people go to Reddit because it can be a bit toxic in places, but there's a section of Reddit called Shower Thoughts, and this is just people who are exercising that. They're thinking about a problem, and then they'll walk away from it, and the stereotypical example is, I went and had a shower. You're doing something else. You're having a shower, you're talking to someone, you're making a cup of coffee, and then suddenly the solution comes to you. Oh, wow. Oh, I've got to write this down. And that's why writers and comedians will sleep with a pad and pen next to their bed. That way, if they wake up in the night, great idea for a story, great idea for a joke, they've got to write it down because they're doing something else. And there's this wonderful, it's almost like a synergy. I feel like I'm talking in business terms here, but almost like a synergy between your conscious brain and your unconscious brain. When you give up on a problem with your conscious brain, you can allow your subconscious to take over. And that is much more powerful than your conscious brain because your conscious brain is dealing with all sorts of other things. And so handing that off or just talking to, like literally talking the problem out loud. I've had it before where I've gone, I used to call it consults because I used to be a big fan of the TV show House with Hugh Laurie. And he said, can I get a consult? And I'll go over to someone and say, right, here's the problem. This is what I'm doing. And as I'm describing the problem, I get the answer. I'm like, oh, thanks. Brilliant. I've got it. And I'll walk away and they're like, what? I didn't do anything. I don't know what happened. But okay, yeah, you can thank me for that. That's fine. And that getting help, pair programming, asking someone for help, or just describing the problem, even if you describe it in a technical way to non-technical people, the answer will just come to you. I promise you.
Absolutely. I can definitely relate to that. That has happened many times within my team with me and with my fellow colleagues as well. That's a great technique. Just explain the problem to somebody, and you're in that direction already while you do that.
Absolutely. Because then even if you don't come up with the answer, describing the problem, they may see, like, you've tried to solve it in 3 different ways, and none of those solutions have worked. And you explain those, and you say, I don't understand why these 3 solutions haven't worked. Then they'll go, how about this 4th one that you're not thinking about? That's it. That's the answer. Excellent.
Yeah. And also
Excellent.
something that you touched upon was that, just take a break. Sometimes it really helps. It's very important as well. And even though you're starting, and there might be people telling you need to work hard and everything, but it's taking a break is as important as working hard.
Absolutely. You have one body. I mean, in the future, this may change with all the sciencey things, but you have one body, and if you don't look after that, you can't do the programming, right? And so if you've been sitting down for 45 minutes, perhaps consider getting up and having a walk around. Walking around can clear your head. Maybe get a drink. Maybe go stand outside and get some fresh air and feel the sunlight on you and feel refreshed that way. I don't know, whatever it is,
Yeah, absolutely. That's not much talked about, but that's one of the very key things. If you're a software engineer, that really helps. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so we talked a little bit about how we think that .NET is good for beginners, right? And I tend to agree with you because, like you say, if you don't want to spend a lot of money, you buy a computer. If it runs Windows, if it runs a Linux distribution, if it runs Mac OS, you can install the .NET tools on there, right? And if you're running Windows, it kind of already has them on there, just well under the covers. It's .NET Framework, but it's still there. Because I remember when I did my computer science degree, we did it. We used .NET for a lot of it, and the lecturer was saying, you don't have to install anything. Just remember this really long file path, and that's the C# compiler. It was like C program files, Microsoft .NET Framework version 2 point something /tool/csc.exe, and we would invoke it from the command line and pass all of the files through, and it would produce an executable. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
Not very user friendly at all, but if you don't mind that slight lack of user friendliness, get yourself Visual Studio Code, get the .NET Core SDK, or I guess by the time this comes out, the .NET 5 SDK. I'm not sure. Get the .NET SDK, get the Visual Studio Code, and it's literally all there, right?
Absolutely. And especially with .NET 5, there's a lot of confusion being cleared and much more beginner friendly there. And I absolutely love that direction .NET is taking. Just one .NET, no .NET Core, .NET Framework. It avoids and that if you're a beginner and you're confused what's .NET Core, what's .NET Standard, don't worry about it. A lot of people are confused with that. Even I was, even with 10 years experience. So there's a lot of confusion there. But that's going to go away pretty soon, I think. We are in the right direction.
Absolutely. I do like, I believe it's a C#9 thing. I may be wrong. It may be a new .NET thing, where you do, if you have the canonical Hello World C# console application, right? If you're trying to teach someone, it's like, ignore all of this cruft at the top using system.collections, public static void, ignore all of that, namespace, whatever. And you can actually ignore all of that now in the new version of C#. You could just literally write system.console.writeline hello world, and it will compile. And I think that's a wonderful step forward, especially for beginners, because if you look at a hello world, I believe it's using system, blank line, namespace, my app, a curly brace, public static void main, curly brace, console.writeline, curly brace, curly brace. So you've got 10 lines of code, and the only one that's relevant to a beginner is right in the middle, and it's a single line. So I totally agree. Get rid of all of that cruft. You don't need it if you're a beginner, and you don't need it if you're writing tools as well, because it can all be sort of inferred. It's brilliant.
It's brilliant. Yes, exactly. Yeah. I remember after I finished my university, and I found a job as a Java teacher in one of the computer institutes, and had to teach a Hello World program there. And Java also had the same thing: public static void main, and I think it was, I don't remember now, it's system.println, or it was very similar to control write line. And to come to that line, I had to explain, okay, what's namespaces, what's a class, what's public, what's static, what's void. And I think getting all that, away from the beginner is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, it really is. Simplifies it so much. I remember watching some, so we talked about there's loads of resources, right? There's some videos that Microsoft have put together. It used to be called Microsoft Learn. I'm not sure what it's called now. And I definitely don't know what it's called when the episode comes out. But I'll put a link in the show notes if I can find it, where it's like ASP.NET Core 101. And I believe it's Scott Hanselman who hosts it, and he goes, so what you do is you type this command into the command line, and it spits out 100 files. It's not 100 files, but let's say it's 20 files, right? Go to this one file, scroll all the way down to the bottom, ignore everything at the top, and type this line in, and then run it, and you'll see it says hello world in your web browser. And I'm like, I absolutely get it. But all of that, like, for a beginner, I'm one of these people. When I'm learning something new, I brought up iasync enumerable. This is not something for beginners, but I brought that up earlier on. And when I wanted to learn, instead of learning why would I use this, how would I use this, I went, okay, so how's it implemented? And I went on this deep rabbit hole of how it's actually implemented in .NET Core, and then worked my way back out. And I was like, oh, I get why I would use that, but only when I got to the end. And, there are some beginners who are incredibly curious, who will want to be poking at things and say, well, what's this? Like you said, I have to explain what a namespace is, what a class is, what public means, what static means, all of these things. And then we get to this one line where it's valid, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And beginners are very curious, and it's a good thing. And but having that, top level statements in C#, and I think that's wonderful for beginners to start with. I like the fact that the docs are getting improved continuously, which wasn't the case some time ago, and that's definitely a good, proper place to start with. And you mentioned Scott Hanselman, and I'm absolutely a fan of his videos, which he puts out computer stuff they didn't teach you. Mm-hmm. And I love them. I love those videos. And if you're a beginner, I recommend you to go see some of the things there. It's I wish there were more content like that. He absolutely goes to the basics and starts from there, and it's great. And I wish more and more beginners also put their experiences out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I trained as a teacher, and I know that when you learn something, there's several different levels to learning something, right? I know of 4 levels. There may be lots more. What I'm about to say may be outdated. I don't know, but there are multiple levels to learning. There's like basic recall. So I say to you 2 + 2 = 4, and you say 2 + 2 = 4. Right? That's basic recall. You're just remembering what I've told you. And the highest tier is being able to put that knowledge into your own words, to take it, internalize it, and produce your own reasoning based on the rules and logic I've provided to you. So if I said to you, the for each keyword in C# tells the .NET compiler to get the iterator for a collection and work its way through the collection. Now, my description is going to be horrendously wrong. There's going to be people yelling at, no, it doesn't actually do that. But that's my understanding of how it works, because that fits my worldview of using a for each in a C# listing. But just saying those words is kind of boring, right? But if you are able to just repeat that straight back to me, you've taken it in, it's gone into short term, it may go into long term at some point. But the way to reinforce that and push that knowledge all the way into long term storage, where your brain will make lots of synaptic connections between all the neurons and it will always be there, is to think about it, to reflect on it, to play around with the ideas, and then to put those words out again, but in your own context, in your own words. And so a beginner going, hey, so today I learned how F strings work in Python. Here is an F string and here is what it's doing. And this is how I build one and this is how I use it. That is someone who is operating on the highest level of learning because they've taken that thing that they've learned, that theoretical, let's put it straight, right? Compilation stuff to the majority of developers kind of boring, right? How do F strings work in Python? You can look it up, but you don't really need to know. You just need to know that an F string exists. So taking that knowledge, that dry, boring knowledge of what an F string is and how it works and applying it and then getting your own understanding of it, that's where the money is. That's the wonderfulness of learning. And so being able to echo that out and just write a little blog post. Hey, today I learned how to do F strings and it greatly simplified my way of using printing strings in Python. And let me show you why. Boom. There you go. You've just proved you've learned it. And it's a reference for when you come back later. I found that when I first started getting into .NET Core back in version 1, pre-version 1, I started blogging about it. Every week I'd write a whole new app and then tear it to pieces in the blog post. And I found that a year later, I was going onto my own website and searching for keywords to find that I'd already written about it and just, yep, totally, I get it now. Because I'd forgotten it, like you said earlier on, right? You've learned all this stuff, but then you forget some of it. And you mentioned Scott Hanselman, right? There's this brilliant quote by him where he's like, I've been doing this for 15 years, 20 years, whatever it is, some huge amount of years. And he's like, and I still Google how to do a jQuery selector. And I am there for that. I totally agree with that because it's not something you do every day. It's not something you're going to remember, right?
Right. Yeah. And that leaves, some space to remember important things. If you can look up something, you don't have to remember it. And putting things out as a blog or a video or a tweet or whatever, it's a good way to round off whatever you're learning. And I think a lot of beginners should do that more. At least I wish I did that more.
Yeah. I agree. Because then it's like taking control of your own learning. Even if you are at a university, even if you are taking a course, you're following some prescribed thing, right? Making notes on that and making them public so that you can look back on them and maybe other people who are studying the same thing can then draw their own conclusions based on what you've said and what the course material says. It gives them a chance to sort of learn it a little bit more. It deepens that knowledge. And then, like you said, it's a reference material for later. I've got stacks and stacks of binders full of my handwritten notes from university. I will never look at them again. But there'll be that one time when I'm like, how did I do that binary tree? Oh, I can't remember how I did it. And I can sit there and Google, but if I digitized it all, I could just search through it. Oh, there it is. That's the image, right? I got it now, Right.
It helps you and it helps others as well who are in the similar path. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's what it's all about, right? You said at the beginning, you love to give back, you love to mentor people and help people get over that next step. And I think that's what it's all about, really. The majority of the knowledge that we have as developers was given to us secondhand by someone else. We're not going out and going, right, I'm going to build a C# compiler for .NET. It's the tools already exist. The language already exists. Let me show you how it works. And so passing that knowledge on, either in a passive way where you're just like, here's a blog post, here's a video, or in an active way where you're sitting with someone and saying, right, let's talk about this. What are you struggling with? Okay, you're fighting with select and projecting the results of a select onto a new object type. Okay, let's talk about that. Let's figure this out together, because then it reinforces your ideas of it and it helps the other person to see a real world example of what you're trying to teach them.
Absolutely, yeah. And sometimes the beginners encounter a few questions that are so basic that sometimes it takes a senior developer to think about it a bit. For example, we talk about single responsibility principle a lot, and while reviewing the code, and we take that as granted. Okay, this is what it should be. And when a beginner, I faced that once. That he asked me, why single responsibility principle? Well, that's a principle. You have to follow that. But why? And when I started talking him through it, and it helped me also trace back my steps and not just take it because it's a principle or because somebody wrote a book about it or not, but you take the journey with that beginner in the same level, and that helps both of them, the senior and the junior developer. And and when you put that out, let's say something very trivial, and you learn about that, and you can still put that as a blog post, even though it looks basic. It definitely helps a lot of them. And basics and fundamentals, we need more content out there when it comes to basic and fundamental things.
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of people recently sort of want to dive directly at, let's write about the super complex thing, and let's do this super complex thing, like you said, right? Let's ignore the single responsibility principle, and let's maybe write a blog post about making a game in C# and .NET. And then they've got code everywhere that's talking to everything, and it's just a jumbled mess of spaghetti horrendousness. It does the job, but it's going to be difficult to maintain. And the idea behind these principles and these patterns is that, yes, what you've written today works, but tomorrow, when you're a completely different person, 6 months down the line, when you're a completely different person, or when a completely different person looks at it, they aren't going to be able to understand what's going on. They aren't going to know that when you change this variable over here in class number 1, it somehow affects the variables in class number 2, but they don't understand how it's all wired together because it's all a jumbled mess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the also tips that I would give a beginner is, when you see a principle or a law or anything in the programming languages world or design world, it all comes with a certain trade-offs, and it's generally hidden. Nobody talks about that. But this is the principle, or this is okay. You need to do unit tests for all your code that you write. Yes, but if you're crunched for time and you need to do a trade-off, test your most important code, and not testing some of the other parts might still be okay when you're crunched for time, so that you still maintain the quality that you want to, and test the most riskiest part of the code. And any advice or anything someone claims on social media, or we need to take it as a trade-off. We need to take it with a grain of salt there, and be open to challenging that principle or challenging that law. And that is very important as a beginner. And I think beginners bring in so many important questions. That is one of the reasons I like mentoring, is because they ask why to some of the basic questions that I think that it is fixed. That does not change, but it may, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And by asking these questions, it's not rocking the boat. It's not being offensive, and at least as long as you don't do it in an offensive way, it's not being offensive. It's not rocking the boat. It's not trying to be edgy. It's not, and definitely never ever be afraid of asking a question, right? Never be afraid of asking a question, and never be afraid of making a mistake, right? Because as long as you have a team around you, there are checks and balances to make sure that if you do something that's not quite right, the rest of it's the responsibility of the team to make the project. It's not your responsibility. At least that's the way that I've always worked when I'm in a team. Again, maybe I'm a terrible developer, but it's you have the rest of the team to ask questions of and to check things with. There have been times in my career when I've worked on something super complex, and I've walked away from it for an hour, maybe to go get some lunch or something, and come back and said, "Can I please talk this through with someone? Because I'm not sure this is even a good way to do it." And just talking through it, and then someone else understands where you're coming from and says, "Yep, totally, I get it," based on the assumptions you've made. Because that's the other thing, right? If we're working for a client or a customer, you're making assumptions on what they have said, right? We always talk about the experience that someone's had, right? My experience with things will be different to your experience with things. So when somebody says to me, hey, I want you to write an application that translates text, okay, I will do my best, right? What is it that you need it to do? Now, my understanding of translate this text may be different to your understanding of translate this text. I'm from a culture which reads left to right and that uses predominantly English. But let's go all the way over to Far East Asia, where technically they read from right to left, and their language is completely different. The written language is different. There are subtle nuances. There are things that you don't even have to say. I studied Japanese for years, right? And you can have an entire conversation with someone, and the things you don't say are the most important things, right? But if you're not saying it and you're machine translating it, the things you haven't said won't be translated. And so my assumption that you want to translate this text, which is a transcription of what someone has said, will lose some of that context because there are things missing, right? Absolutely. And that's because of my assumption is based on what I think you want me to produce. I've always said, right, the customer never knows what they want until you give them what they don't want. And that has always held true. Every single project I've ever worked on, it's you don't know what you want till we give you what you don't want. And that's why we have short iterations, and that's why Agile exists, and that's why Waterfall doesn't always work. But again, like you said there about trade-offs, right? Agile works in some instances when you can trade off the let's do loads of work and deliver a huge piece of functionality. Because if you can get rid of that, that's Waterfall, right? Huge amount of effort, loads of work, deliver one chunk of functionality. Whereas Agile is more, let's start iterating towards what we think the solution is slowly in chunks and let the customer tell us whether it's right or not. And then we can gently readjust our course. Whereas Waterfall is very much a case of this is what you will get. And if it's not right, we need another 6 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think I read in one of the books that software design is very fractal in nature. So changing something after a long period of time, once it's built, is going to cost more in terms of money as well as time, and also in terms of energy that you need to think through that the developer needs to solve. And short iterations are wonderful, so that you need to process only a limited number of information at that moment, and you solve it, fix it. It's a wonderful process, and I think most software companies needs to embrace it in one way or the other, the agile processes.
Mm-hmm. But again, it's a number of trade-offs, right? If you need to have the small iterations, the maybe your domain requires you to work on a huge amount of information at the same time. Maybe Waterfall works better for you. Again, it's that trade-offs all the time.
Absolutely.
It's no one solution fits every problem.
Yeah. It applies to software industry more than, I don't know about other industry, but definitely it applies to software industry.
Yep, I agree with you completely. Okay, so what I'll say to you, Vijesh, is we've spent a lot of time this afternoon already talking about such wonderful things, and I do want to thank you very much for being on the show. But where can people go to find out more about you and the content that you're putting out there? You know, you mentioned earlier on, hey, more beginners should put out content. Well, if the beginners are putting out content, should us non-beginners be putting out content? I don't want to call myself an expert, but obviously you are. So should the experts be putting out content as well? And if you are putting out content, where can people find it?
Oh, well, that's very flattering. You call me an expert, and I'm always on the path of learning more and more things, and there are more experts in the industry. But I like putting out content, but I'm doing it much lesser than I want to. But I am on Twitter, not so active, but I'm on Twitter. If you ever want to, talk to somebody who can, speak a bit about his experience, and perhaps if you look for a mentor, I can be that person, and I love doing that. And I write blogs on Medium. And one of the goals that I have for next year is putting out video content as well, and go into some of the things that are pretty basic in C#, but not much talked about. So it answers some of the why questions. For example, why C# properties, or how interfaces are related to delegates. So some stuff like this, but that's for the future.
I mean, that may be the present by the time this episode comes out. I don't know. I remember the Timecast pod machine wibbly wobbliness.
Absolutely, hope so. Yeah.
So watch this space, I guess.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Well, what I'll do closer to the time of this coming out is I'll communicate with you again, see if I can get some links to some of the other things that you're doing. If you started the video content, or maybe you haven't, I'm not sure. But if you're interested in finding out more about Vijesh, all of the links will be in the show notes. The way that it works is when you're listening, there's some redacted show notes, which is like the short version, and a link through to a transcription. In the transcription, there'll be loads of links. So, give that a read as well. I like to produce the transcription because, it can be useful for grabbing a quote, or for our friends who maybe can't listen to the show. They can then read, they can read through the show, or maybe they have some issue there. They can use a screen reader to help them. I don't know. I'm trying to be as accessible as possible is what I'm getting at. But there you go. Excellent. So yeah, I'll get those links from you, Vijesh, slightly later on, a little bit closer to the time of releasing this episode, because obviously we do the time shifting. But yes, so thank you ever so much, Vijesh. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you this afternoon, and I really appreciate you taking well over an hour out of your afternoon to talk to me and to talk to the listeners about beginners things and getting started with C# and .NET for beginners. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you so much, Amy. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you. That was my interview with Vijesh Salian about our advice for beginner developers. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .NETCore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .NETCore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, and to come back next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.